Welcome, everyone. You are in the right place to see licensing and collaboration for AEC professionals with your presenters, Jeremy Smith and Scott Wolfsweiler. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jana. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Imaginate team, Scott, my fellow presenter, the panel that's here that I'll introduce momentarily, others that are on the call, representatives from Autodesk, we appreciate that you took some time out to join us for this webinar. Just as an intro as to really what's behind and motivating us to do this, this idea of working remotely and how to establish licensing and work with licensing and activating Autodesk products, or collaborating, having your team collaborate remotely. It may have just been a passing interest to you in the past, or maybe you had no interest whatsoever. You were completely content working on your file servers or using file or server-based work sharing in Revit, things like that. But now, through a situation out of all of our control, sadly, this pandemic, now you are, in addition to worrying about the welfare of your family, your friends, your employees, we know that most, if not all of you, are now forced in a position where you have to think about how to work differently under quarantine or lockdown, and how is it that you can keep your business going while transitioning employees from an office to their home or another remote location. And so this clearly, these topics have clearly taken on greater importance for your business, and the goal, really, the overarching objective of this presentation that Scott and I will deliver, and for the questions to follow, are to at least take some of the uncertainty out of how you go about using Autodesk products at home, your team, how you can share and access data that ordinarily you would be doing so from the office, what are the options for that, and how we can support you in doing that. And we hope that if nothing else, it at least alleviates some of the stress out of the things that you're dealing with now when it comes to being productive and working with Autodesk software, and we're happy to be at least part of the solution. So first, let me introduce myself and my co-presenter, Scott, who will follow. My name is Jeremy. I'm sure I've spoken or dealt with some of you on the call, either through a support case or just in the past. I work in the Imaginate Solution Center as a product support specialist with AEC, primarily supporting Revit, BIM360, and other related products. Prior to joining Imaginate, I had worked at Autodesk for nearly 10 years, worked in the support organization there, doing tech support for the MEP products, eventually managing the Revit and Vault support teams. And my last role there was in sales enablement, teaching our sales organizations how to understand the construction industry in particular. So that's my background, and I started out using AutoCAD as a CAD manager. So I'm happy to be part of this discussion, and Scott will be presenting the second half of this relating to collaboration. My focus will be more on licensing, and he'll tell you a little bit more about himself. I also want to acknowledge those that are joining our panel. As I said, there'll be a Q&A session, and so we have several experts that will be available to answer the questions that you post, and we certainly encourage you to do that. We're going to leave plenty of time, so don't be shy in posting a question in the Q&A, and we'll address those. But we're glad to have these individuals: Scott Burke, who's our AEC Cloud Services Program Manager, many, many years in the AEC industry. We have Joe Hedrick, Manager of Infrastructure Solutions. Glad to have his expertise here, and we're happy to have two Autodesk representatives on the call too. Scott Baker, who does technical specialist with automation and licensing, and Stephen Bamberger, a partner manager, who can also address some of your questions perhaps about the program that Autodesk announced related to cloud extended access services. So we're glad to have them here. We'll reintroduce them when the Q&A comes. So I'll start with my portion. And again, here's the agenda. We're really breaking this up into two big buckets, this topic of working remotely. Licensing, that's the portion I'll cover. How is it that your employees who had active software on their workstations in the office, what's the means to get their products working at home, whether it be on their home computer, or how do they take their workstation or laptop home with them and ensure continuity with licensing. And I'll cover briefly what those options are. And then the second half that Scott Wellslager will cover is the collaboration portion. How is it that you can access and manage data, work share, those type of things? What solutions are available for that? And the assumption, of course, for those of you on this call, either you're at home now, as well as the rest of your team and employees, or you're in the process of transitioning your team to their individual locations, as long as you have to do so. So again, hopefully this will address some of your major concerns and prompt some questions later. So let's talk about licensing just briefly. And again, this is high level. If you want to dig a little bit deeper, please post the questions. But generally speaking, there's options for any sort of license type that you have with your Autodesk software to be able to activate the product from home. And we'll touch on those briefly. There's a single user, which of course the individuals are signing in and with their Autodesk credentials, and any licenses that are assigned to them are associated with that unique user ID. And so essentially there's a way for them to do the same thing from home. We'll talk about that briefly. Some of you may still have standalone products, perpetual seats that just simply have an activation code. We'll talk about what you do in that instance if they need to use a different machine remotely. And then, of course, we'll talk about the multi-user or network licensing model and how you can allow users to activate software offline if they're unable to connect with your license server. So we'll talk about those options. So again, just to simply put, if your users, if you have single user access licenses and they sign into Autodesk, which sort of pulls their entitlements, they'll do the same thing from home. Again, if they take their workstation from the office, if they've done that and brought it home, the good news is they'll have the Autodesk software installed, likely, and it's just simply signing in when they launch the product. Their licenses will be attached to their username, and they should be able to work with no issue there. If they don't have an office machine and they simply have a machine at home that they can use, but they haven't installed Autodesk software, they may have to do that obviously first, and we'll talk about a resource for that. And again, activate it using their single user access sign-in. I don't have a slide for the standalone, but just to be brief about that, if they are going to work on a machine that they have at home, they can simply request an activation code on that other machine and continue to work using whatever version they have for that. Multi-user network, a little bit more complicated because, again, for the most part, they're accessing from a pool of licenses that is served up from a license server. That license server typically, though, resides inside your firewall, and very difficult in some cases for users to remain connected to that server or access that server. So we're going to talk about a couple of options, or three options, that you might consider for users that have a multi-user network license. And the three are listed here: borrowing a license, requesting a home use license, or maintaining their connection to a license server through VPN. And we'll talk maybe about a couple of challenges just to watch out for with that. So the borrow license option, fairly straightforward. Many of you might have used this before. If you're connected to the network and you're traveling, or you're going to be elsewhere off-site, you can borrow a license, and you can do so for up to 6 months. So it essentially writes the license to that machine. It takes it away from the pool of licenses on the license server, so keep that in mind. If you have 10 licenses in your license file and one user borrows a license, there'll be 9 available for anybody else. So very similar to checking out a book from the library. Until it's returned, no one else can take it out. So again, through the feature of the borrow license, they'll have this calendar feature, and they can select how long they're going to check out or borrow the license for. A question that's come up before, and there's some knowledge base articles, if you have the AEC collections, Do they simply just borrow once for the collections, and does that grant them access to all the products in the collections? The short answer is no. What they would need to do is borrow a license for each individual product that they need to have access to. So that may be something you'll have to help them with. They'll have to borrow a license for the individual products within the collections. The other thing, too, to keep in mind is if the best case scenario, things clear up and you're able to return to your offices before the 6 months is over, they would have to return the license early if that's the case. Otherwise, they'll still maintain it. It won't be available in the pool. So that'll be something that you may just have to prompt them to do. But again, that's the first option for multi-user network licenses. Second is requesting a home use license. And there's a form to fill out, which will provide a home use serial number for you. And there's multiple ways to get to this form. I just have a quick screenshot of how Autodesk walks you through obtaining that home use serial number. And that way, again, they're not required to connect to your licensed server. They can simply activate the product remotely on the products that they're using. There is a product eligibility link that may be something that your administrators or contract managers may need to check just to make sure that the product is eligible to do this. Most are, but it might be something worth double checking. And again, filling out the form, you'll get the instructions on how to activate the license once you get that serial number. And again, as we mentioned, the third way is to continue to have users maintain their connection to the license server if they connect through a VPN. A couple things to keep in mind. Sometimes because the bandwidth is slower, depending on where they are located, the license, sometimes we have many cases that come in about that. It times out, so it's not unable to pull the license remotely that way. You can increase a variable that allows for more time for that license to be pulled. And of course, there's other ports that need to remain open in order for that license to be able to be pulled from the license server. So there's a few considerations there, and we have, again, several blog articles on ImagineIt's website and knowledge base articles that talk about some things to look out for. Those are really the three primary ways that, again, a multi-user or network license can be used from your remote teams. So again, as you could tell, it was very high level, very rapid. If you have any specific questions about any of those scenarios or your particular license, please post those questions in Q&A and we'll touch on those at the end of our session. I just wanted to point out before I transition this over to Scott on collaboration, a few resources to keep in mind or bookmark. If you're not sure how to get to all these things that I mentioned, ImagineIt, we set up a page that talks about remote collaboration and what to do. This presentation will be posted here along with these other links that you see here, and there's a link below, so we can sort of like guide you to where you need to go in your particular situation and any training that might be available too. Another good resource, especially if you have users that may be using a machine at home that they don't have any software loaded on, they can use the AVA feature, ava.autodesk.com virtual agent, where they can download their products, request an activation code for a standalone product. There's also a link to the home use license request form, among other things too. And the other feature or resource rather that I'll point you all to that you've probably seen already, the Autodesk also has a page dedicated to this COVID-19 pandemic and how Autodesk is supporting you, and of course several links related to licensing, collaboration, and the things that you might need to know having to change your work environment completely. So thank you for your attention on that. Again, hopefully you have an understanding that your licensing, your products can be activated and worked on by your remote employees. So with that, I'll transfer this over to Scott Walslager, who will talk about collaboration options for AEC customers.
Thank you, Jeremy. Do you hear me all right?
I can.
Cool. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Walsliger. I'm going to address some collaboration considerations and what you can deploy immediately to work from home and make sure that work isn't being duplicated or you're not overwriting one another's work. I'm going to throw out a bunch of ideas out here, and I encourage you all to type in questions if you have any in the question and answer panel on the bottom. And at the end of this, in 10, 15 minutes here, we'll address those questions. So a little bit about me. I have about 25 years experience in the AEC industry. I've pretty much focused my career in the IT side of this industry and working with infrastructure setups and server setups and anything data management related. So I got some experience in Bentley's ProjectWise, Autodesk Vault, BIM360, and lots of other platforms as well. So anything is open as far as questions go. You can ask away. Next slide, please. The first thing I would like to say is just, I think in this environment, especially we're in today, in an emergency situation where we have an unanticipated workforce working at home, is the important thing is share and trust first. And I say this because oftentimes in my conversations over the years in IT environments, we plan for disasters in IT, but generally it's never come up in my history of 25 years and thousands of meetings of what happens if there's a virus that goes around in a pandemic that everybody has to stay at home and work. In all my IT plans and sessions, I've never heard that come up once. So most networks and most computer infrastructures are not really set up for just everybody going to work at home. It might be set up for 5 people to work at home or 3 people to work at home, but 100 people or 200 people or 50 people is a different problem than 1 or 2 people. So I'm going to address some of those issues in this presentation and give you some ideas of how you can go about possibly solving some of the challenges that you're facing today. So next slide, please. So the hardware situation for remote workers, this probably seems obvious to some of you, but there's 4 different ways that a remote worker can work. One is if they have a laptop in their office and they just take that home, and that's probably the easiest person because they're probably already set up in some sense to work remotely on the network or within the organization. But again, now all of a sudden we have 50 laptop users or 100 laptop users out in the field that need to work from their homes. You can have the workers, your employees, take their desktop computers home and depend on them bringing them back in the same condition that they left with. You can have the people install the Autodesk software or whatever software they need on their home computer, or you can use remote desktop technologies like Windows Remote Desktop or Log Me In or Go to My PC or any of those other type of technologies to log into the user's desktop from their home. So those are really 4 methods I see as being viable solutions for the remote worker. Next slide, please. The second part of that problem is the software applications that they use and the services that they use, and then the data that they use. So how are people going to access data? You know, for one remote worker, Microsoft File Services might be adequate. You may have a project folder or project drive on your Microsoft server in your office, or it might be even on Amazon, a shared cloud service, for instance, that people map a network drive and they go to the P drive for all their project information. That works great in the office, but working remotely, again, you have a bunch of people hitting that Microsoft File Services store, and now all of a sudden it takes 20 minutes to open up the Revit model or an hour to open up their Civil 3D file, and that's a pretty big loss of productivity compared to being in the office. There's synchronization services that people can try, things like Dropbox and Box and SharePoint, where perhaps the server synchronizes with a local connection on their area, so all the files appear to be local. But then, as some of you know in this phone call, that Autodesk has some problems with these types of setups where file locking doesn't happen, somebody overwrites somebody else's file, reference files are missing, data shortcuts are missing from Civil 3D, Revit file model corruption because 2 people are trying to modify the same element at once. There's a lot of inherent problems in some of these common file services that people use for, Word documents, PDF documents that don't necessarily work all that well in the Revit and the Civil 3D world. And then there's Autodesk file services for remote workers as well, which is like BIM360 or Autodesk Drive or Autodesk Mobile. Next slide, Joe, please. So I kind of said this already, but I look at, and a lot of IT people look at it this way, is you can put everything into two categories. You either bring the users to the data or you bring the data to the users. Bringing the users to the data can sometimes be challenging, and if everything's behind your firewall in your office building, now everybody's hitting your internet connection, and again, that internet connection could be a bottleneck to your organization. So think of, the crowded streets. That's the analogy that I always use when I talk about internet connections is if you have a rush hour traffic, you can only get from point A to point B so fast. In no traffic, you can get from point A to point B at 65 miles an hour versus 20 miles an hour. It's the same thing with internet traffic into your organizations is the more traffic there is, the more bottlenecks there is, and the more waiting people are going to have to do. Next slide, please. So in most cases, if you want to bring the users to the data in your organization, this is a challenging proposition to just immediately deploy. Again, it's the bandwidth that you have on your internet connection, software licensing that you got to deal with. It's the cost of the hardware that you may need to implement to host all these remote users coming into your system and using your hardware instead of using their home hardware. And then there's complexities with VPNs and internet service providers locally that block certain things. So bringing the users to the data is a really big challenge when you're in a large organization. So a better probably way in an emergency case like we are now is the opposite direction, is to can you switch to the next slide too, please? Bring the data to the users. And there's some common things that people use in organizations already for sharing with remote workers. Things like WAN accelerators, Riverbed, or generally termed as wide area file services, Cisco solution. You have Autodesk Revit server that may be installed locally on your servers in your offices. And you can install those remotely as well. Some of you may use Imaginate Clarity to help move data around and copy data. Panzera is another popular one out there, and then BIM360, which also falls underneath the indirect data management methods, which is this method is, hey, I need to work on this part of the model, or I need to work on this part or these files. I can open up those files, and they're synchronized with my desktop locally wherever I'm working. So I always am working locally, but my changes are saved up to the cloud or my local server, depending on what solution that I'm using. So this works like a library card, like Jeremy described in the license checkout process, where if I'm going to work on a Revit project or a Civil 3D project, I open my files that I need, and everybody else is locked out from being able to edit those files, or those, I should say, elements really at that time, or modify that database at that time, because the cloud is controlling who has the ability to write and read to certain elements. Next slide, please. So what you can do today, relatively easy because Autodesk made it that way, is Jeremy provided some links earlier too, and I'm going to provide some more, is try to use BIM360 platform. And the one that I'm going to focus on here is really the design side. These are other options. Some of you may have seen this slide before, but we're really talking about trying to centralize the project data in the cloud so that everybody on the project team can access that data at any time, any place, from any device. So iPad, iPhone, or their desktop computers. In the design world, this is important, I think, because we often talk about Revit and Civil 3D and all the AutoCAD applications that may exist, or any other publishing application that you use. But consumers of that data in this remote work world are probably just as important, if not more important, than the Revit users or the Civil 3D users. Because in the office, I can just go to the print off my set of documents, and I can throw it on my project manager's desk, and he or she can redline that document set and, you know, give me some feedback relatively quickly on what I need to change. In the remote worker world, we don't have our big printers and our OSAs and our Xerox down the hallway that we can print all this documentation out and give to somebody. We need a new way to distribute that information and making sure that it's not out-of-date information as well. As soon as you change it, you want to be able to let people know that that information has changed. So on the BIM360 platform, the project data is key. Design sits in here where it helps manage the Revit and Civil 3D files. And that's where you do your authoring of data, where people collaborate, redline, markup, create issues, and then also do your detailing. Next slide, please. So why BIM360 for Civil 3D, Revit, AutoCAD, all the projects in a single repository. And this isn't just for Civil 3D, Revit, and AutoCAD as well. All documents, when I say all project documents, I mean Word files, Excel files, PDFs, anything associated with that project can be stored in the BIM360 world in the cloud. You have full control over the documents and the models within that environment, navigate models within the environment. You can save your changes from your Revit model to the cloud so that everybody's up to date as what has changed. Collaborators can view, markup, and print. Office 365 integration, what that means is you can edit a Word document or an Excel document right within the BIM360 interface if you are an Office 365 user. So there's no need to actually download and change Word documents on your local computer. You can just do it all online within the BIM360 environment and save those changes so you don't have any file locking issues or somebody trying to update the same thing at the same time. So you work on the files locally, save the changes to the cloud, and everybody sees those changes. Next slide, please. The platform looks like this. This is how you can access your models and your data. Anybody can access models, like on the left-hand side in Internet Explorer or Google Chrome or whatever browser that they're using on their desktop computer. On the right is an example of somebody using an iPad for the review process. Next slide, please. So to get started in BIM360, Autodesk is giving everyone free access to BIM360 through May. So you can go and get started on this immediately. We offer some start services if you're interested with some assistance from the Imagineer organization, but you can also go out there and do this yourself. So I'm going to give you some resources, some links to look at after this call as well, after this slide. But activate your account, you set up your organization's profile, you invite project administrators, you set up projects, and you enable the services that you want to use. That's the 5 steps that really need to happen for you to get started with BIM360. And these steps can be completed in 5-10 minutes using online resources. Next slide, please. So in the month of April, Imagine is going to be doing weekly webinars every Thursday, 4/2, 4/9, 4/16, 4/23, and 4/30. Not sure on time yet of those webinars, but the purpose of those webinars are going to be to do mini training sessions on how to use BIM360 and the various features that we're showing or discussing here within this webinar. So we'll go into training and detail on, picks and clicks on actually how to do some of these things. You can register at our website there. The next slide, please. And then here's some of the learning resources for you. If you have any questions, there's lots and lots of videos out there and user guides that can help you get started. And of course, Imagineer is here to help you as well. Anything that we can do, if you need a jump start to get going, contact your sales representative or somebody on this call. Also refer to the YouTube channels for Autodesk and learn BIM360.autodesk.com has a ton of resources as well and guides, PDF files, things that you may need. And also our Productivity Now platform has some information about BIM360 if you're using Productivity Now. Next slide. I think that's All right, and here's some information on how to get your access to your cloud collaboration products till your end of May 31st, and frequently asked questions about access to those systems. And with that, I think we turn it over to questions and answers.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. I do have a couple of general questions that people had asked previously and asked again on this one. The slides and the recording will be posted as soon as we're physically able into that remote collaboration site. The recording might not be up until tomorrow. Corinne asked originally if she's got an employee on a network license who wants to bring their work desktop home. Not sure the VPN option would work for us. Would a home license or borrowing license be best in this case? And Scott Burke already answered that, but borrowing a license would be the best option in that case. Next up, Travis wants to know, in regards to using Revit with remote desktop, are there any recommended settings that need to be tweaked? Minimum internet connection speeds, anything like that?
No. The one caveat on that is it depends on the remote desktop technology that's being used. If you're just using Microsoft Remote Desktop, there's graphics acceleration that can be problematic. But what I say with people at remote desktop and 3D models is if you're not doing a lot of spinning and rotating around in models, generally speaking, remote desktop will be really good. If you're just doing design and layouts and laying out rooms and things. But as soon as you start doing anything that's graphics intensive, that's where remote desktop tends to fall down unless you have a Hyper-V set up with Citrix type scenario, which there are some companies out there that do have that, but that's the best way to do that.
Okay. Benjamin says, we just switched over from perpetual single use with maintenance to the subscription model. All of the software was licensed and is working well under the older serial numbers. Do I have to rock the boat right now to assign my users? And if anyone is answering, you've got yourself on mute.
This is Scott Baker, Autodesk. I can take that one. Technically speaking, because the license is already activated in the perpetual sense, they're not going to cease working at this point. Obviously, if you would have to do a reinstall of the operating system, then you might run into an activation issue. So due to circumstances currently that we're all in, there's no reason to rock the boat, so to speak, and go in, switch that license model over to the actual single user and assign those licenses. That can be something that can be addressed after we get past this particular event we're all working through right now.
Thank you, Scott. Atif says, if I have an older version of AutoCAD and I've requested to deploy my license to home, will I get the same version installed or a newer version? Jeremy or Scott?
Scott Baker, I could take that one again. Typically speaking, when you request a home use license, you do specify the version that you do need. Provided it's still in our supported previous version list, then the home use license will be provided for that version.
Thank you. And Gail wants to know, for BIM360, is full control by the person who set this up in BIM360 and not the team members? That's right?
I'm assuming full control, meaning you can set up permissions for folders and files within the system so that only certain users have access to certain information.
Yeah, you'll designate a administrator for your BIM360 site, and that person will then assign the privileges to everyone else.
Scott says, I've already got some seats for BIM360 that I paid for. I'd like to add more under the extended access program. Can I add those seats to my current account?
I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe somebody from Autodesk does.
Yeah.
You can always add BIM360 seats for a fee, obviously, but
right.
I think
we do have the extended use that just became live on the 24th, and the BIM360 design and the BIM360 docs will be available at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. And that will allow for you to add those licenses to your existing site. I would recommend that you speak to someone at Imagine It to make sure, because there are some nuances.
Would it be correct that they would add themselves as a trial license, and then that trial license could then be invited to the site?
That's correct, because it's BYOS, right? Bring your own software.
Right. So that my assumption was that if you don't have any site at all set up, then one person in your company should set up a site and invite people in, and that would be easy. If you already have a subscription to BIM360, then have the individual users sign up for their own BIM360 design site, and then they would be available to then be invited into your paid subscription site. Is that correct?
Yes. Have somebody set that up and then invite their specific colleagues to that site.
Right.
Then they could be added and brought that to a paid site.
Right. That's what I thought. Great. Thank you.
All right. Michelle asks, we have some users who are using Civil 3D. What's the recommended way to get our standards to home users? Should we have them copy the standards to their C drive? Any advice for anyone using ProjectWise and getting standards into their system?
So you could do that a couple different ways. One way would be to have them put it on their C drive. Another way would be to share it through BIM360 docs and just put a folder out there that people could grab that standard Civil 3D template from. From ProjectWise, if you're using ProjectWise, I always just stored the standards in a folder in ProjectWise, and then had users copy that folder structure down to their computer, because it's a right-click, not checkout, but copy folder structure, and it'll then put it in their local working folder in ProjectWise.
Okay. And the BIM360, regardless, the extended period ends on May 31st, meaning if you start accessing it on May 30th, it's going to end on May 31st, correct?
Yes, that's my belief.
Okay. I had a clarification from an earlier question. Eileen wants to know, how do we know what licenses we have? We've been having our admin done by WorkSmart, which has been difficult getting support. We don't know our licenses.
Everyone should have somebody that admins your Autodesk account services page, which will tell you what licenses you have. If you don't know that person within your organization, you can call one of us and we can look up who is that person within your organization. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, and this is Jeremy. If you're an Imagine It customer too, and you're unsure what's in your contract, if you're either not a contract manager or a software coordinator, usually we can look up what's in the contract and how many seats you have. But if you do have an outside firm or a third party doing that, it may be a good practice at least to have somebody internal to have visibility into the contract as a software coordinator at a minimum.
Okay. Sylvia says, we always save all our files on our company server. If we use BIM360 to host files, how can we have file milestones saved on our company server?
There's a couple different ways that can be set up. You can use the archival tools and the desktop connector, and actually Imagine It Clarity as well to capture stamps and time at milestones within the BIM360 environment. So that can be configured so that you have replication between your BIM360 cloud and your local file server fairly easily.
Great. T says, for government agencies licensing, what do you recommend the best way to work from home, taking into consideration the high restriction of internet access?
my recommendation is the cloud for that is BIM360. Depending on your government agency that you're working for, DoD stuff is a little bit different than Ohio DOT, for instance, a little bit more top secret kind of things. So depending on your organization's cloud policies for the government, that is, in my opinion, the best, easiest way to get around all the government restrictions.
Okay. Alfredo wants to know, beyond May, how does the subscription to BIM360 work? Is it a yearly subscription per user?
You can sign up for it as little as monthly at a time or yearly.
Okay. Jason says, we use McLaren servers that run AutoCAD 2019 to convert drawings to PDFs automatically. We prefer to use standalone server licenses, but we only have user-based AEC licenses, which prompts us quite often to log into Autodesk. Is there an alternative to AEC?
So just, I'm not sure I follow that question. I wouldn't mind following up on that one, but if you're running an application that just runs AutoCAD to publish PDFs, it's going to use an AutoCAD license probably at minimum, depending on if it's architectural objects or civil 3D objects. You might have the object enablers in there that make a difference. So you could just use a generic, just an AutoCAD license. There's no reason for an AEC collection license if that's what the question is. And we also have Clarity that can help automate that as well, as Clarity can take and batch plot a bunch of things to PDF automatically.
Okay. So, Jason, it may be good if you want to reach out to us and have the technical teams talk with each other to help you with a good workaround for that. I'm not seeing additional questions, but I'm going to give it a minute because, as everyone knows, I talk relatively quickly. Sometimes I can talk faster than people can type. Jason followed up and said he asked Jerry at Imagine It, and he said standalone server licenses are no longer available. With that, I don't see any additional questions. I want to thank you all for spending a bit of your day with us. We truly appreciate your time. If you have additional questions, reach out to us at imagineit.com. Reach out to your Imagine It representative. Everyone, thank you so much for a great presentation. Have a wonderful rest of your day.